Protecting prayer. New today, a major decision from the Supreme Court. A former high school football coach wins his fight to pray after games. We're talking live to the coach at the center of the decision and what his victory means for the separation of church and state. Plus, a legal loophole puts abortion pills in the spotlight. Just days after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, there's a new push by some to ban the pills responsible for more than half of abortions in America. The legal fights that lie ahead. And passengers back into airports nationwide, leading to the busiest day since before the pandemic. The incredibly busy travel week ahead as airlines deal with cancellations and staffing shortages. And pilots for one major airline are planning to protest this week. How you can navigate your holiday trip. I'm Ruta Shabazi in for Nicole Burley. It is Monday, June 27th. This is News Nation Rush Hour. We'll get to those top stories in just a moment, but first we want to take you right now to our lead story for the night. Today, the Supreme Court ruling a school in Washington state violated the religious freedom of a former high school football coach when the district told him he couldn't pray publicly after games. The coach at the center of that historic Supreme Court ruling, Joseph Kennedy, joining us live in just a few minutes. But first, News Nation's Tom Dempsey joins us live from Washington to break down this ruling. So Tom, what does this mean for religious freedoms in the United States? And joining us now is the man at the center of this case, former assistant coach at Bremerton High School, Joe Kennedy, along with his lawyer, Jeremy Dice. Thank you both for being here. I know it's a busy day. Coach, to you, this has been a long battle. How do you feel?
I feel vindicated. That's the only way I can say it. And I'm just smiling. I can't stop smiling, thinking that 7 years of all this work and long drawn out fight has been absolutely worth it in the end.
7 years, and you have now set a new precedent in this country. Where do you think it goes from here?
Well, only thing I know is it's going to have me go back to the school and be able to be a coach and thank God afterwards. Beyond that, that's a legal question to ask these guys.
So you are going back to the school and resuming your coaching position?
That's all I asked for, and I know there's some logistics we need to work out, but I am expecting a phone call back from the school to work it all out.
And you know, the implications of this decision also mean people will have the same rights when it comes to less popular belief systems and religions. How would you feel about a Satanist, say, for example, exercising his religion on the school field?
Well, that's a great thing about the First Amendment. It applies to all Americans. It's not just for one, specific beliefs. It's for all Americans of any faith or no faith. It's just an American thing.
And there was an issue about the so-called coercion, right? Whether your players would have felt pressure to join you in prayer on the field since you were in a position of power. They respected you. They wanted to please you. The school principal testified that a parent complained that his son, quote, felt compelled to participate. The student was an atheist. He participated, he said, because he felt he wouldn't get to play as much if he didn't participate. Were you aware of that at the time? And do you understand where they might be coming from?
It was never a concern, and that specific student who I know we're talking about, that was my team captain and probably played every down of every game and led my team. These are the people that, this isn't a religious thing. This is a free exercise. This is about the freedoms of Americans. It had nothing to do with, trying to get people to join me or making people feel weird about what I do. It's just being, with the diversity and inclusion of everyone. That's what our school is about, and that's what our football program does.
And of course, there are other people who say there are private schools all over the country who are religious schools where prayer is encouraged. It's practiced every day. Why not take it there? Why do it in a public school?
That's a great question. Simply because that's not what the First Amendment is about. It's not just for a select few of people that go to a private school. This is something that is very much in the public. I work for the public. My kids went to the public school. My wife worked for the school district. So we're very much part. This is where I graduated. So, I can't think of a better place to exercise, the freedoms of all Americans and, right there in my hometown at my school.
And I know you are hugely popular in that community. I've read about you and your roots and your success story. In the dissent, the justices wrote that prayer was neither private speech nor benign because you conducted a, quote, media blitz, which ultimately led to the field being stormed and students being knocked down. What's your response to that?
Yeah, that was a concern that I brought up to the school, and I had no control over the field. I asked them if they could close the field, and so we can alleviate that. They didn't have time to do it on that one, but that was no longer acceptable. And the school, they rectified it. They just closed the field to everybody, which they should have done to begin with.
All right. Well, we appreciate your time. We know you both have a busy day, Coach, and your attorney, Jeremy Dys. Both of you, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
And the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade continues to set off a series of shockwaves across the nation. Today, the ACLU took to Florida to challenge the state's new abortion law that bans nearly all abortions after 15 weeks. Pro-choice groups asking the state to put a temporary stop on the new law set to go into effect Friday. They argue the right to abortion is grounded in the state's constitutional right to privacy, including whether the woman has a right to terminate pregnancy inside her own home. And this is a legal fight expected to play out across the country. Brooke Schaefer joins us now live from Florida. And Brooke, the abortion pill is currently protected federally. Can states still opt to ban this medication? Protests, celebrations, and vandalism. Americans are reacting in very different ways to the Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade. And as News Nation correspondent Dre Clark shows us, what happened over the weekend may be just the start. Ukrainian officials say at least 11 people are dead, dozens more feared killed or injured after a Russian missile strike hit a crowded shopping mall in central Ukraine. Some reports say more than 1,000 civilians were in the mall at the time of the attack. Footage from the scene showing flames and huge plumes of black smoke pouring out of the building. Today, WNBA star Brittany Griner appeared in a court near Moscow. Her trial on cannabis possession charges will begin Friday. That's about 4.5 months after police arrested her at an airport when she was returning to play for a Russian team. She'll remain in custody for the duration of her criminal trial, up to 6 months. Griner could face 10 years in prison if convicted on charges of large-scale transportation of drugs. Meanwhile, President Joe Biden has joined world leaders in the G7 summit, hoping to tackle issues like the Russian war on Ukraine. Joining me now is Morgan Chalfant. She is the White House correspondent for The Hill. Good to see you. Ukraine, obviously, at the top of the agenda at the G7 summit. What's come out of there so far?
So there have been a number of announcements that the White House has touted this morning. For example, the nations agreeing to ratchet up tariffs on Russian goods, agreeing to support Ukraine for the long haul, also agreeing to step in and help out with Ukraine's budgetary shortfalls and supply economic assistance. And they're also working towards this idea of a global oil price cap on Russian oil in order to cut down the revenues that Russia is getting from its sales of oil and gas. Now, of course, that's not something that's solidified yet, but they're certainly working towards getting an agreement and endorsing something like that they would have to work through the mechanisms of actually figuring out how that would work.
And it's a tricky balance, right? Because the goal is to sustain Ukraine, but also to ease economic hardship here at home politically. What's the balance?
Right. So the steps that the president has taken to support Ukraine and to punish Russia as well have pretty broad bipartisan support, strong support in the country. I think where the issue is the disruption to the global energy markets, both from the war itself and also some of the penalties and the efforts by European countries and the U.S. to not be reliant on Russian energy. So what you're seeing the president doing is trying to find ways to find alternative sources. For example, next month he'll be going to Saudi Arabia as part of a broader trip to the Middle East to meet with leaders there. It's a controversial trip because he'll be meeting with the Saudi crown prince, and possibly a trip that wouldn't have happened if there wasn't this balance in this issue with the energy prices.
And President Zelensky made an appeal. He's hoping the war will end by the end of the year. Do we have any indication as to whether the G7 leaders seem to think that's a realistic goal?
So from the White House point of view, they're very careful about actually laying out a prediction, right? They've said, warned that this could go on for months and that they're trying to support Ukraine for a long period of time. What they want to do is really supply Ukraine with enough assistance so that it's in a strong position once they do get to the negotiating table with the Russians. U.S. officials have said numerous times that's what they think is going to eventually happen, that Ukraine and Russia are going to have to work this out to bring an end to the war, in negotiations. But of course, there's no sign of that actually happening anytime soon.
Sadly, the U.S. has committed $54 billion to Ukraine. How much are the other members of the G7 giving?
So the U.S. is by far the largest contributor. I don't have the exact number of what other members are committing, but for example, I think there was a United Kingdom package recently that was over $1 billion. But the U.S. really gives quite a bit to Ukraine. And of course, we saw Congress in bipartisan fashion a couple of weeks ago authorize that $40 billion package for Ukraine. That's economic assistance, humanitarian assistance, and of course, security assistance. And that's what the president is now pulling from when he announces these tranches of security aid to the Ukrainians.
All right, Morgan, thank you for helping break it down for us.
Thanks for having me.
And we have breaking news right now. Crews on the scene of an Amtrak train derailment in central Missouri. The train was traveling from Los Angeles to Chicago when it derailed in the town of Mendon after colliding with a dump truck. Mendon is about 80 miles northeast of Kansas City. Amtrak says 243 people were on board the train. A nearby hospital says at least 3 people from the scene were brought in, but information on their conditions wasn't available. News Nation does have a crew heading to the scene, and we will update you as soon as we have new information. And this is the second incident involving an Amtrak train in as many days. In Northern California, 3 people died and 5 were injured when a car collided with an Amtrak train yesterday afternoon. That crash happened in Brentwood. That's about 55 miles east of San Francisco. The victims were all inside the car. No one aboard the train was injured. Coming up next on News Nation Rush Hour, with gas still at a record high, there are more electric vehicles than ever on the road, but will this mean an increase in hard-to-battle fires? We'll hear from firefighters about their concerns with EVs. And later in the hour, Lifetime is turning the Gabby Petito case into a movie, but is it too soon for the families grieving the loss of their children? Senior national correspondent Brian Entin will join us to discuss the reaction. Electric vehicles make up a larger share of cars on the road than ever before. EVs now account for more than 5% of all vehicle registrations in the country, with registrations reaching double digits in some metropolitan areas. More people driving EVs, though, also means more EV crashes, and that is leading to a change in how firefighters respond to those accidents. News Nation correspondent Nancy Liu is at a charging station in Los Angeles. And Nancy, why are first responders changing their tactics? Yesterday, U.S. airports saw the busiest travel day since the pandemic began, and airlines are struggling under the pressure. What you can do and what you can expect headed into the July 4th travel weekend. Plus, even with gas prices slowly declining, the hold gas stations are taking on your credit card is going up. Why some companies are holding up to $175 when you gas up. Thanks for joining us on News Nation Rush Hour. I'm Rudy Bay-Shabazi in for Nicole Burley. The travel nightmare at airports across the country doesn't appear to be stopping people from flying. This weekend, TSA agents screened the highest number of passengers since February of 2020. But travelers are still getting hit with a slew of flight cancellations and delays. Right now, with flights coming into and out of the U.S., there are more than 4,400 delays and more than 800 cancellations. Despite the headaches, 3.5 million Americans are expected to travel by plane during the upcoming holiday weekend. Correspondent Paul Gerke is live at LaGuardia Airport tonight. And Paul, what is it looking like there? And Paul, what is behind all these delays? It seems like every travel holiday and almost every weekend is just like this now.
Yeah, just walk it back. Juneteenth, Father's Day, Memorial Day, Christmas, all of them similar issues.
And this 4th of July is shaping up to be one of the busiest on record when it comes to travel. AAA predicting nearly 48 million people will travel 50 miles or more over the holiday weekend. This is a nearly 4% increase over last year, bringing travel volumes just shy of those seen in 2019. The biggest surprise, those hitting the road could set a new record despite the high gas prices. Joining me now is managing editor of The Points Guy, Clint Henderson. Thanks for being here. Good to see you. So yesterday you heard the TSA screen more people since February of 2020. What is happening here?
So you've got all this demand that's been building for the past 2 to 3 years during COVID, and people are going to travel. They're ready to hit the road. They don't care how much it costs. They don't care how many crowds they have to fight. But it's leading to the airlines, the airports, even Uber and Lyft can't keep up with the demand. And if anything goes wrong, as you've been reporting, it's a domino effect. And pretty soon you're seeing anywhere from 7 to 17% of your flights canceled. And it's hard to get rebooked right now. So my heart goes out to the people traveling this coming weekend.
It's always fun to be on hold for 3 hours with the air carriers. So what are the airlines going to do this 4th of July? Are they going to be able to handle this influx of people?
Short answer, no, probably not. We're probably going to see similar numbers to what we saw all weekend, which, Delta used to be the on-time leader, could rave about not canceling flights. And now it's 7% a day of their flights getting canceled lately. So unfortunately, I think you're going to see more of that of the 4th of July weekend. Now, I will say the airlines have reduced their schedule slightly in July. So I'm hoping once we hit the clock on July 1st, some of those reduced schedules will help the airlines catch their breath. But frankly, I've been hoping that since Christmas, and every weekend it seems like there's more cancellations and delays. So consumer has to be their best advocate right now, and we've got lots of advice on that at The Point Sky.
Yeah, and you're not alone in that. And demand is soaring. There's shortages of pilots, shortages of air traffic controllers. You throw in severe weather. Why are the airlines still booking people that they know they can't transport?
Well, they're not necessarily. They just are not staffed to recover if something goes wrong. So if there's a thunderstorm at LaGuardia, all of a sudden you've got planes and crew out of place and they can't recover because they just don't have the pad that they used to have. And that's true at TSA checkpoints. That's true in airport workers. So it's a really tough time. The airlines are trying to reduce the schedules, as I mentioned, but they're just not reducing them enough to keep up right now.
Okay, so now the important part. What is your advice to those planning to try to travel, especially over the 4th of July weekend? Should you just reconsider and plan for like a 12-hour road trip instead?
Well, I mean, if you want to do that option, but with gas prices the way they are, I'm still inclined to say you should keep flying. But there are tips you can do. First of all, have the airlines app be able to rebook yourself. If something goes wrong, get on the phone with the airline, get in the line to rebook, and get on social media, try to rebook yourself. Go to the lounge if you have lounge access. Know what other airlines fly that route. So if you're flying American to Dallas, figure out ahead of time if Delta also offers that flight. So you can immediately try to get that other flight if that American Airlines flight gets canceled. So there are tricks out there, but you really have to be your own best advocate because the airlines can't keep up, as we've been talking about. And they're not going to call you proactively and say, hey, your flight might get canceled. Let's put you on a new flight.
That's for sure. All right, Clinton, thank you.
Anytime.
The price of gas is slowly dropping cent by cent. The current national average is $4.88 a gallon, but drivers are still feeling pain at the pump, of course. Customers using credit cards to pay for gas may see gas stations actually putting a large hold on your card, in some cases as high as $175. Joining us now is News Nation business contributor Lydia Monahan. Thanks for being here. So if the high gas prices weren't enough already, stations are now holding up to $175 of your money when you swipe?
Yeah, you can't win. It's Graham's golden rule. Them that has the gold makes the rules, right? And so these are huge, massive companies that are juggernauts. But the bottom line is they are concerned about their bottom line. And so the fear is that somebody shows up, buys $100 of gas, and is only good for $50 of it, and you have the gas station paying that extra $50. So these credit card companies have allowed gas stations to put a hold of up to $175 on people's cards just to avoid a situation where the gas station is having to pick up other people's slack.
So apparently this is legal. So if we buy $40 worth of gas, it could show up as $175 deducted from your credit card balance. We know that rental car companies and hotels already do this, but could we see this happening in other areas as well?
Well, historically, those have been the three areas where this is most common. And I think it's important to note gas stations have always been able to put a hold on people's cards. Credit card companies have always allowed that. but the credit card company puts a max. So previously, the maximum amount of the hold that a gas station could put on somebody's card was $125. Now it's $175, which is a byproduct of the fact that we have inflation and gas prices are surging. But gas stations have always been able to put a hold on credit cards. It's just that it's increased now as a result of inflation and rising gas prices.
Good to know. And typically these holds are lifted in a couple of hours, but you don't really notice it. But a lot of people are really skating on thin ice right now. They can't afford it. It could cause overdraft fees. What is your advice? What should people do to avoid that problem?
Yeah, so there's a few ways that you can avoid it. One is paying in cash. Go to the ATM, get out $40 and just do it that way. Or you can go into the gas station and specifically ask, give me $40 at that pump. And that's one way of avoiding that that hold. If you are paying with debit card, you will need to have $175 at least in your account to make that hold. If you have a credit card, that's a different situation. You don't actually need to have that in your bank account. You can just charge it to a credit card, and as long as you have it maxed out.
And the fuel industry we know is regulated, but are the gas stations themselves regulated?
Yeah, they're regulated federally, mostly in regards to environmental concerns. The Environmental Protection Agency monitors them, make sure they're not emitting various, fuels and whatnot. And then state by state, they're regulated differently. So states do monitor them just to make sure that they're not charging you for $5 of gas when they're actually just giving you $4. But the price of gas is not something that, the government has any control over.
All right, Lydia, thank you. Always nice to know about something like a hold on your credit card. A man is dead after he was dragged into a pond and attacked by an alligator in South Carolina. We'll dig into how common these fatal encounters are. And right after the break, it was another blockbuster weekend for Top Gun Maverick, but now the movie is facing some competition at the box office. We'll hear from the actor who plays young Elvis in the Elvis biopic about his portrayal of the King of Rock and Roll. Top Gun Maverick, now the first Tom Cruise movie to gross $1 billion worldwide. The film pulling in another $29 million here in the U.S. over the weekend. But for the first time, not the king at the box office this weekend. That honor belonged to a different king. News Nation's Sloan Glass is live in the studio. And Sloan, Top Gun Maverick no longer on top. And we have an update now to that breaking news out of Missouri. Police are on the scene of an Amtrak train derailment in central Missouri, and they are confirming that multiple people have died. The exact death toll has not been released. The train was traveling from Los Angeles to Chicago when it derailed in the town of Mendon after colliding with a dump truck. That's about 80 miles northeast of Kansas City. Amtrak says 243 people were on board the train. We now know that at least 50 of those people were hurt. News Nation does have a crew heading to the scene. We will update you as soon as we have more information. A man is dead after an 11-foot gator dragged him into a pond, killing him. After the break, how common these attacks are and which animal is actually the most dangerous in America. Plus, all new in the second hour, another major ruling for the Supreme Court, this time over whether a group of doctors who face criminal charges for overprescribing powerful pain medication should be held liable for contributing to the opioid crisis. We'll discuss how the justices ruled and why. A 75-year-old man is dead following a rare but tragic alligator attack. Police say that man was near a pond at this Myrtle Beach golf club when a massive 11-foot gator took hold of him and dragged him into the water. Search crews were able to locate that man's body, but it was too late. He had drowned. The alligator's fate also sealed. Wildlife officials captured the animal and euthanized it on site.
South Carolina is home to about 100,000 alligators, and they're not typically considered a major threat to humans. Fatal alligator attacks are not unheard of, but remain extremely rare. Friday's attack brings the state's total recorded fatalities to 4. Just last month, officials in Charleston caught this 6-foot gator outside a local elementary school. The gator was seen safely transported to a new location. As for the overall risk, alligators are pretty low on the list when comparing animal-related fatalities. The average American is far more likely to die from a bee or a hornet, or even man's best friend, a dog. The most dangerous animal in America, though, may surprise you. According to data from the CDC, deer are America's most deadly animal, claiming an average of 120 lives each year.
Still ahead on News Nation Rush Hour, how soon is too soon? A new movie in production portraying the story of Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie, but are their deaths still too fresh? After the break, senior national correspondent Brian Etten will join us to discuss the reaction. And all new in the second hour, Los Angeles police, an officer dies during a training exercise. His mother filing a wrongful death lawsuit claiming he was beaten to death, what the training was intended to simulate. New developments in the murder of Gabby Petito continue to emerge, and her story appears to be heading to the small screen. A Lifetime movie on the Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie case is in the works, and already, of course, there is social media backlash. News Nation senior national correspondent Brian Etten has covered this story from the beginning, and Brian, for some, this movie comes too soon. We're just getting started. A lot more to tell you about tonight. The next hour of News Nation Rush Hour starts right now. Good evening. I'm Ruta Shabazi in for Nicole Burley. At this hour, we are following several new big stories, including breaking news out of Missouri. We have confirmed that multiple people have died after a Chicago-bound Amtrak train carrying hundreds of people derailed after hitting a dump truck. At least 50 people are injured. We have a team on the way, and we'll bring you new details from the crash site. Also new tonight, this shocking story out of California. A Los Angeles police officer dies during a training exercise, suffering a, quote, catastrophic spinal cord injury. The major allegations his mother is now bringing forth in a wrongful death lawsuit. But our top stories tonight, we're taking a closer look at three major Supreme Court decisions over just the past few days. New today, Supreme Court justices siding with doctors facing criminal charges for overprescribing powerful pain medication, and a former football coach placed on leave for praying on the field after games. Plus, the ripple effects around the country after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. We have live team coverage with our Kelly Beeson and Lydia Moynihan. Adoption could become more common. The Adoption Network Law Center says American families adopt around 140,000 children each year. News Nation's Kelly Beeson joins us now. And Kelly, you talked to an adoption center who expects that number to grow. Even more companies are taking a stance against the Roe v. Wade reversal. Joining us now is News Nation business contributor Lydia Moynihan. Welcome back. So who is coming out against this ruling? A lot of companies taking a stand, even going as far as to pay for women's travel to get a legal abortion. The Supreme Court issuing another major ruling today, siding with a former high school football coach who knelt and prayed on the school field after games. Washington correspondent Tom Dempsey is live for us tonight. And Tom, this is a decision that could potentially strengthen the acceptability of religious practices in public school settings around the country. We're following that breaking news in Lynn County, Missouri. Authorities are giving a press conference on the train derailment. Let's listen in. Okay, you've been listening to a press conference in Missouri regarding that train derailment where 3 people were killed. One person was in a dump truck that the train struck. He was killed, as well as 2 people in the train. This happened around 12:43 local time there in Missouri. The train was on its way to Chicago. 207 people were on board, according to authorities in that press conference. This was an uncontrolled crossing, meaning it didn't have lights or a gate. We will, of course, continue to follow this and bring you more updates as we get them. We also have a crew on the way. In the meantime, voters in 8 states head to the polls tomorrow. What role will the recent Supreme Court rulings, including the overturning of Roe v. Wade, play in their outcome? Or is it too early to know? 5 states are holding primaries: Colorado, Illinois, New York, Oklahoma, and Utah. And there are runoff elections in 2 states, South Carolina and Mississippi. There's also a special election in Nebraska's 1st congressional district. Let's bring in now Niall Stanage from our partners at The Hill to talk a little bit more about this. So Niall, does this abortion ruling and today's ruling on the school prayer change the equation for these candidates? Are we seeing a shift in their strategy?
I think it's probably a little bit too late to see a shift in their strategy for these primary and runoff elections, Ruta Bay. But there's no question that the abortion ruling and the other ruling that you mentioned do change the political environment. They make these kind of cultural issues much more salient in an election year that we had previously expected to be very much dominated by economic concerns, inflation, gas prices, so on and so forth. So I think that's the real difference, a changing of the news agenda.
And when you look ahead at the presidential election, does this put Donald Trump back in the lead, since he did, in fact, accomplish his promise of banning abortion with his 3 Supreme Court justices that he nominated? Does that win back favor with evangelicals who he may have lost?
It could do. I mean, it is certainly a reminder for those Republicans who voted for Donald Trump as president, but perhaps were put off by his personal demeanour, that he does have a lasting legacy that conservatives are happy with. That legacy most specifically seen in the appointment of judges, not just at the Supreme Court level, but throughout the judicial system. Now, having said all that, does it help him in 2024? I'm not entirely convinced about that. I think the question in 2024 is, do Republicans want to put up Trump again if he runs, or would they prefer another candidate with similar appeal but less baggage, like Florida Governor Ron DeSantis?
He was effective, though, in accomplishing that goal. I want to shift now. The AP did an analysis, and it showed more than 1 million voters, mostly in the suburbs, that are leaving the Democratic Party to become Republicans just within the last year. This is happening all over the country, but it is more dangerous for Democrats in the suburbs. Why is it happening, and what does it mean for both parties going forward?
It's clearly bad news for Democrats and good news for Republicans. Suburban voters, as you kind of alluded to in your question, Rita Bay, are really the archetypal swing voting group. To me, I think this speaks to 2 things. One is the rise of economic concerns, and perhaps other concerns like crime rates as well, moving people from the Democratic column to the Republican column. But also, frankly, the former President Trump, no longer being in the news every day. Whatever else about his other electoral good points and bad points, he was pretty bad for the Republican Party in the suburbs. So perhaps him being less prominent is helping in that regard.
All right. Now, Stanish, thank you. Appreciate your time. And we want to go back to that breaking news, the train derailment in Missouri. We have David Curley, transportation expert, on standby here to tell us a little bit more about it. So, David, what can you tell us? We know that 3 people are dead. One of them was in the dump truck. 2 others were on the train. And this is the second train derailment in as many days.
But this is not surprising. When you find the accidents that happen with trains, the majority of them happening at these crossings. We don't know whether this was a controlled crossing or an uncontrolled crossing, but this is where derailments happen with trains. When vehicles are on the tracks, the trains can't stop. They have too much momentum. It's just physics. There's no way for them to stop when somebody is on the tracks. And when you put a piece of metal like that in front of a train, there's a good chance it's going to derail. And this is really a horrific derailment, if you look at it, to see how many cars have actually flipped on their sides. And some of the video from those who survived is striking. In one of the videos, you can see the conductor, who appears to be on his cell phone, calling into Amtrak to tell them what actually happened on these rail lines in Missouri.
And you say this isn't surprising, and this is common. How common is it?
Oh, it's the high, probably more than 60, 70% of these accidents are caused exactly as this one has happened. Either a car, a truck, some kind of vehicle gets stalled on the tracks, and a train is coming. There's no way for the vehicle to get off the tracks. There's no way for the train to stop, and we see these deadly incidents that have happened again today in Missouri.
Well, given how common this is, it is kind of surprising that there still are uncontrolled intersections. I suppose in rural areas, you know, they don't think of it as much of a threat, but then something like this happens with hundreds of people on board.
The National Transportation Safety Board, which will be investigating this incident, has made many recommendations that we have more controls on some of these train overpasses. And some of them have been answered, but there are a lot of recommendations out there that have not been answered by the NTSB. And this, unfortunately, is another example of the problem we have when we mix this road traffic with the rail traffic.
Mm-hmm. And I always think about, when I see train accidents and I see bus accidents, the fact that there are no seatbelts still. We're required to wear seatbelts in cars and in planes, but not on buses and trains.
And I'm not sure whether there's been a recommendation about trains and wearing seatbelts. While we do see the majority of these kind of derailments caused by this way that we've seen with the truck or a vehicle on the tracks, They don't happen that often. I mean, we have a few a year, but it's not like something that happens every day. What we do see every day is a train impacting some kind of problem at an uncontrolled crossing.
All right. Well, of course, we will continue to follow the story. David Curley, thank you for your expertise.
You're welcome.
Coming up next on News Nation Rush Hour, the Supreme Court sides with 2 doctors convicted in a major opioid scheme. What's next for those doctors? Ahead. But first, the Los Angeles police officer dies during a training exercise. His mother filing a wrongful death lawsuit claiming he was beaten to death. What the training was intended to simulate. This 4th of July weekend, gas prices, inflation, and chaotic flying conditions aren't stopping people from taking that trip. Just this weekend, TSA agents screened the highest number of passengers since February of 2020. Meantime, AAA predicts nearly 48 million people will travel 50 miles or more over the holiday weekend, with 3.5 million of those travelers taking to the skies. Correspondent Paul Gerke is live at LaGuardia Airport. And Paul, it seems like flight delays and cancellations will just be a theme this holiday and every holiday.
So it's either gas prices for the gas in the plane or gas in your car.
You're just full of good news, Paul. Thank you. Entering into other news now, and a shocking story. The mother of an LAPD officer who died of spinal cord injuries says he was beaten to death during a training exercise meant to simulate a mob. She's making these claims in a new wrongful death suit filed against the city. Alex Capriello joins us now with the story. And joining us now in this conversation is retired NYPD detective Michael Alcazar. So, Michael, thanks for being here. What happens in these trainings?
It's tragic for sure. So the responsibility falls mainly on the LAPD, right? Their training unit. Who were the supervisors? Who were the trainers? Did they have a controlled situation? How did it happen that this poor police officer got injured so severely? I mean, when we go to training, we're police officers. We do get a little bit rough, right? Most police officers are alpha, so I can see them getting a little bit rough. So I can see where the training personnel has to control the situation, make sure it doesn't get out of control, because sometimes police officers get overzealous. And when they interview these police officers, I'm sure that will reveal exactly what happened and how did this injury happen? How did this occur?
He had trauma to his head and his spine, according to this complaint. Is there a situation at play here, possibly, where they ignored the warning signs and they just didn't stop?
I mean, I hope that's not the case, but they said that in the reports that they were grappling. So I'm sure in grappling, you know, they're picking each other up and throwing each other on the ground. I hope they had the proper equipment. I hope there were mats on the floor. Again, the trainers, the supervisors have to control the situation. You got to call like timeout or cut to make sure that it doesn't escalate where somebody gets hurt, like in this case. So it sounds like it just got a bit out of control.
And there are questions we don't know the answers to. There may have been other factors at play that we don't know about. But really, how is the public supposed to trust a police force to protect it that can't even keep its own officer safe during a training exercise?
It doesn't bode well for the LAPD, for sure. It sure doesn't bode well. It sounds like they just got a lot out of control, and led to this tragedy.
All right. Well, Michael Alcazar, thank you for joining us. And coming up on Rush Hour, the Supreme Court sides with 2 doctors convicted of distributing thousands of opioid prescriptions. What the High Court said straight ahead. And WNBA star Brittney Griner appeared in a Russian court today, where we learned her trial will start next week. After the break, what the U.S. is doing to bring her and other Americans being held in Russia home. Russian missile strikes intensifying in Ukraine. Today, a shopping mall in the middle of the country hit by a barrage that left at least 13 people dead and more than 40 injured. Russian forces also shattering weeks of relative calm in Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital, firing long-range missiles at the city early Sunday. According to Kyiv's mayor, at least 2 residential buildings were hit. A kindergarten also suffered some damage. Meantime, WNBA star Brittney Griner has been ordered to stand trial in Russia later this week. About 4 4.5 months after being arrested at an airport on cannabis possession charges while returning to the country to play for a Russian team. She reportedly faces up to 10 years in prison if convicted on those charges. All of this going on against the backdrop of Western leaders meeting in Germany for the annual summit of the G7. Washington correspondent Tom Dempsey joins us once again. Tom, Ukraine is a major focal point of this summit. And joining us now to discuss where things stand with the war in Ukraine, which has now entered its 5th month, as well as where things stand with Brittany Griner, is James Beardley, National Executive Director of the Association of the U.S. Navy. Thank you so much for being here. Russia is shifting its attacks back to the capital, again going after high numbers of civilians. What is the strategy there?
Yeah, they've been very much aggressive on a psychological game, and this is about wearing down the Ukrainian people, but also the West, and showcasing that they can take action wherever they want. One of the reasons the Russians are able to strike in Kyiv or Lviv or in the western areas is that the Ukrainians have no real practical way of shutting down the aerial operations of the Russians. They've said that from day one. If the West was very serious about engaging or helping them engage, that would have been on the table early, but we're 5 months into this. There was no serious discussion about actually allowing the Ukrainians to have air defense missile systems, and anything they do at this point is very late in the game.
The G7 summit, is that playing into Russia's heightened aggression?
In a way, I mean, Russia, of course, is not designing operations around that, but at the same time, they will take advantage of the spotlight to really showcase, again, you have the picture of the G7 leaders meeting and threatening with words and showing up in photo ops. Meanwhile, their cities being wrecked and leveled inside Ukraine, and the Ukrainians can't get a hold of the kind of weapons they need fast enough, and when they do, they're being bombed in places like depots where they're coming in from Poland into Lviv. Russians just simply fly over that. They've got air control, so that's drones for surveillance, drones for targeting, and drones to pick it up on TV and report it. And so the Ukrainians are at a real disadvantage, and Russia here is pressing every lever of the physical and the optional game, or the optimal game, by showcasing to the world that no one's going to stop them until someone actually arms Ukraine the right way.
And let's talk a little bit about Brittany Griner and what we've learned about her. Her trial now scheduled to start Friday in Russia. What can you tell us about what's going on behind the scenes? Is there a possible prisoner swap in the works?
I mean, if that comes, it's going to be late. This is a show trial. Russia's famous for it. But notice that, the Russian president will play this very coy, because he'll just point to the United States. We have our own, quote unquote, show trials in Congress where you don't have a real defense for the January 6th folks. And meanwhile, you've got these people in Russia that are facing extraordinary charges, large scale drug transportation for a vape that had cannabinoid oils in it. Well, again, you start messing with the words, that's large-scale drug transportation. There was nothing of the sorts, but at the same time, many people might even argue what you're using here in the United States to talk about an insurrection is the same kind of thing. So I think Vladimir Putin is being a little coy, and he's showing the West that, hey, we're doing the kind of things that you are now being accused of doing, and it's a little bit of gamesmanship in the end, though. Yes, you'll see things like prisoner swaps and negotiations, but they'll use this to their psychological advantage.
The difference, though, being that she's being held in a Russian prison for months on end. Does this complicate the U.S.?
Just bear in mind that our January 6th folks have been in pretrial incarceration for over 8 months. I think it's up to 2 years now. So it's the same type of circumstance.
All right. Does this complicate the war effort or the United States effort to aid Ukraine in its defense of the Russian invaders?
A little. I mean, that's a tough challenge anyways. It's about supply and logistics. How do you get artillery pieces to the front lines from Poland? And again, if you don't control the skies, the Russians can aerial bombard anything that goes into the country. So that's always going to be tricky. Once the war started, it was always going to be hard to do this. I think the administration's done a great job of putting on paper the programmed equipment to move to Ukraine. But there's corruption, there's war, and then there's casualties on the battlefield. All of those present challenges every day. Bear in mind, before any of that even happens, it's about Congress not just putting money on paper, but spending it. And that takes them a while in normal circumstances. So if they're very serious about this, the Pentagon has got to be very focused about the logistics, operations to get howitzers, military equipment, javelins, drones into the hands of the fighters. That is not easy to do while they're in the middle of a conflict. So it's always going to be a bit of a challenge.
All right, Jason, thank you for joining us. Appreciate your time tonight.
You bet.
Time now for a quick break, and when we come back, another decision today coming down from the Supreme Court ruling in favor of 2 doctors challenging their convictions for overprescribing pain medication. After the break, what the move could mean for the opioid epidemic. The U.S. Supreme Court has sided with 2 doctors who challenged their criminal convictions for overprescribing opioid pain medication. The justices did not overturn the convictions, instead sending the cases back to lower courts for review. We're joined now by attorney Dina Dahl. And Dina, thanks for being here. Break down for us this case. What does this decision mean for those not involved in the case, for regular doctors and average patients?
Essentially, the Supreme Court found that the way that the Controlled Substance Act was being interpreted was too broad. They were looking at these doctors and holding them to an objective standard. So what that means is it does allow maybe doctors in prescribing opiates and similar medications more less fear of maybe being prosecuted. It also, though, does make it a little bit harder to prosecute those cases, which, the patient may be more concerned about that.
Yeah, and writing in the majority opinion, Justice Stephen Breyer said prosecutors must, quote, prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant knowingly or intentionally acted in an unauthorized manner. What does that mean for cases already in the works and those in the future?
So now this standard that the Supreme Court has just said will be applied to any cases. And in fact, and for these 2 doctors as well, they asked the lower court to look at their convictions in that light. Essentially, what they said was that they were interpreting it objectively. Were the prescriptions proper based on kind of objective medical opinion? And they said that was wrong. They needed to know subjectively, did that doctor knowingly do an unauthorized prescription? If so, they can be convicted. If not, they would be convicted acquitted. And so they have to look at all those cases now with that new standard.
So is there concern now that this could worsen the opioid epidemic?
I mean, it's possible. In some ways, though, this kind of aligns up with other criminal charges we have. Most criminal charges, we require some sort of intent or knowledge. So they're saying basically that exception to the Controlled Substance Act should require some intent or knowledge that what the doctor was doing was wrong. So not necessarily worsen it, because doctors are on notice, and if they knowingly do this, this is a crime. But I think it does make it maybe easier for doctors to be able to make decisions, patient by patient.
So what do you think? Do you think the convictions of these 2 doctors might be reversed by the lower courts?
It's interesting because I think not, because their particular cases were really egregious. They call them, alleged pill bills. And one of them was 30,000 prescriptions, like this huge volume, one of the largest in the country. The other one had street drug prices for the pills, and you allowed cash and weapons exchange. So those facts, I think, could probably still very well fit into an intent or knowledge requirement under the law.
All right, Dina Dahl, it is a big case. Yet another one this week. Thank you for your time here on Rush Hour.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up after the break, more on the devastating Amtrak train crash that left 3 people dead and dozens injured. The latest when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Rudabeh Shabazi. Here are a few other headlines we're watching right now. We now know 3 people have died and at least 50 are hurt after an Amtrak train carrying hundreds of people derailed. The train was heading from Los Angeles to Chicago when it derailed in central Missouri after colliding with a dump truck. 2 of the 3 people killed were passengers on the train. The other person was in the truck. The uninjured people on the train are being transported to a nearby school. The January 6th House Committee has announced a surprise hearing for tomorrow afternoon. The panel said the hearing will present newly obtained evidence and witness testimony. The committee did not identify the witness or offer any details. The surprise announcement comes days after the committee held its 5th public hearing. 2 more hearings are already planned for July. And there are few answers in the deaths of nearly 24 teenagers at a nightclub in South Africa. The bodies of teens were found in the club with no visible wounds or injuries. Authorities say those teens, who ranged in age from 13 to 17, were slumped over tables and sprawled on the floor. They were celebrating the end of school exams. Toxicology tests are underway. In Colombia, 4 people were killed when stands collapsed during a bullfight. Video taken during the fight shows a 3-story section of those stands collapsing. Look at that as people screamed. More than 300 people were hurt. The bullfight is a traditional event in which the public participates in the bull running event tied to the feast of the Day of St. Peter and St. Paul. Right now, it's not clear why the stands collapsed. Back here in the U.S., a new law in Florida makes blasting your music in your car a punishable offense. Under the law, audio from a car that can be heard from 25 feet or more is considered a violation, and drivers can get a fine of up to $114. For reference, the average car is 15 feet long, so an officer could ticket someone right in front of them if their music is too loud. The rules are even stricter if you're in close proximity to churches, schools, or hospitals. The law goes into effect July 1st. 2 5-month-old puppies rescued from a tortoise den in Southern California. Video shared by a local fire department showing firefighters using a large chunk of a watermelon on a stick to convince the desert tortoise out of the den. After that effort failed, crews started digging and eventually rescued the puppies, and we're happy to report they were unharmed. It's always nice to give you a puppy story. And the Colorado Avalanche are celebrating the franchise's first Stanley Cup in more than 2 decades. The Avalanche defeating the reigning champs, the Tampa Bay Lightning, in Game 6 of last night's NHL Finals. This is Colorado's 3rd championship, but the first since 2001. A victory parade is set for Thursday in Denver. And that is it for News Nation Rush Hour tonight. Thanks for watching. On Balance with Leland Bittert is next.